Grief and anger are two compounding emotions. And if you don't process through them, they kind of pile up. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks that I have not processed grief well.
In this raw and revealing episode of the Max Life podcast, Ben Laws sits down with speaker, author, and leadership coach Dennis McIntee for a deeply human conversation about grief, growth, and emotional self-awareness. Dennis opens up about a recent personal realization, how unprocessed grief was quietly influencing his risk tolerance, inner dialogue, and overall presence as a leader, husband, and father.
As entrepreneurs, I think sometimes we are the most damaged people with high functioning coping skills. Learning to be happy is I think it might be a lifelong journey. I think you convince people through your strengths, but I think you connect with them through your weakness.
I've always wondered, where does some of this ambition come from that you see in entrepreneurs?
When somebody has a wound, every single action revolves around that wound. And until you can get that thing healed, it'll always come back up. Every experience, it's an event plus an emotional attachment to that event creates the experience. You make a living by what you get, but you make a life by what you give.
Welcome to the Max Life podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by my friend, Dennis McIntee. He is a renowned leadership coach and founder of Leadership Development Group, where he empowers leaders to unlock their potential and navigate life's toughest challenges. In this episode, we'll dive into Dennis's transformational journey, including how he's learned to process grief, break free from limiting beliefs, and embrace vulnerability as a true source of strength. If you're ready to level up your leadership and embrace the messy, beautiful journey of growth, this episode is one that you don't want to miss. Again, remember, if you like what you hear, love what you see, please remember to like and subscribe for more Max Life. Welcome to the Max Life podcast. Dennis, I am so excited to have you here. Every time you and I have conversations, oftentimes in person, we go places. So I'm excited for today.
Yeah, it's always fun, Bud, because one thing I love about you is you are a fantastic interviewer. And I think it's really, I think what comes out is that you really care. And that care kind of really comes through in your tone, right? Because people they sort of feel you before they hear you. And I always love being around you because I feel better. You know, it's not necessarily like what you say, and you're a wicked smart guy, right? So I really appreciate what you say, but it's almost like how I feel. And so thanks for, having me on, and I'm excited to hang out with you.
Well, thank you for those kind words. And the audience is going to go, where's the tagline? Paid for and sponsored by Ben Laws. I really appreciate that, Dennis. I have a love of interesting people, and you happen to be one of them. And that's why I wanted you on the pod. And I want to hop in at you and I in the green room before this. I had asked you, I said, how are you doing? And you were talking about coming back from an event. And I'd love for you to kind of just share like that and your response, because I think that this really shows, the depth of who you are. And the fact is that people get to see the Dennis, right, who's up on stage, leading leadership teams for all different sorts of large organizations. And I think that oftentimes they go, Dennis just must know everything. Dennis just must be already there. He has arrived. And I'd love for you to share.
Well, Ben, I think I'm always reminded that we're always a work in progress. Right. And we never really arrive, right? It's sort of like this journey. And what I've really maybe discovered is really just telling the truth on myself, right? A mutual, coach that we have, Dan Sullivan, he says all progress starts when you just tell the truth. And so I'm trying to get really, really good. So you just asked me how I was, and I won't use the cuss word that I kind of shared on the podcast, but not so well. And it's just how I am emotionally. And I think when we can get really, really clear. So let me just kind of tell you a story about what sort of happened. And as I'm kind of processing through this, so I was at a workshop in Southern California a couple of weeks ago. And one reason that I went to the workshop, and people wouldn't know this about me, is that I've become a little bit more risk averse. As now I'm in my 50s, I'm just a lot more cautious, and a little bit, Ben, I realized that's not Dennis. It's not necessarily who I am. Now, this is this is something that only my wife would know. I don't think my team really even knew it, but just but Dennis knew it, right? Because, you know, I'm the best one who knows me. If anybody knows Dennis, Dennis knows Dennis really well. And so I just know it. And so part of the reason I went into this workshop is I really want to kind of deal with this risk aversion. And I just realized it's kind of stopping me. In one of the sessions, they talked about that. It was this session on increasing your window of tolerance. And the session was is that, you know, grief and anger are two compounding emotions. And that when you don't process grief, almost like keep your daily account well and process the grief builds up over time. And grief, you know, Ben, could be any kind of loss. Oh, we didn't hear our sales number. Oh, you know, this person quit, or oh, we didn't get this client engagement, right? Just any kind of little loss. And if you don't process through them, they kind of pile up. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks that I have not processed grief well. I processed the big grief. So like, you know, people dying or, you know, big traumatic things, but there was a lot of little grief that I just sort of, and I think especially as Americans, right? We just kind of like, just don't talk about it, just rub some dirt in it, just get over it, just move on. Right? So we're just going to move on. But not having, right. In not having a space in people to kind of process that grief, it starts to add on, starts to compound, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks that, gosh, of course I'm a little risk averse because I'm carrying this big bag of grief everywhere and I keep throwing a little bit in, a little bit in. And so I think the process that I've really been over the last couple of weeks is really just processing a lot of grief and just having some safe relationships and some safe places to go, hey, I need to talk about this loss. And so I think that's kind of what's going on with me personally. And now now I said I wasn't doing well, but on the flip side, I really have a lot more excitement. So I have this sort of dichotomy going on in my brain where I'm processing grief, I'm kind of grieving through some things, but yet my excitement is increasing and I'm getting more motivated. So that's a long answer to sort of a short question.
You know, Dennis, I love that. I think that what I'm noticing as I'm talking with more and more entrepreneurs, that the ones who have the high highs are the ones who have the willingness to go to the low lows. It's like Newton's law, equal and opposite reactions. I'm curious, what were the symptoms where you went, I'm feeling risk adverse? I mean, like, was it just, did it sneak up on you one day? Were you starting to go, I'm having this internal feeling of some conflict? I mean, how did that show up for you?
Yeah, I think on the inside, I started to get nervous. Even when people started to talk about like taking this risk or stepping into this or, you know, doing this new thing, I just knew in my heart, well, here's a great example because you and I think you might have been at this workshop at Strategic Coach with me. Um, but they were talking about like your next big leap, sort of that next 10x leap. And, you know, you've been a great encouragement, you know, in just my fee structure, Ben, which I super appreciate. But but I saw myself, I need to jump to this next level. And I really got scared and almost like sweaty palms, right? Because emotions are energy and they're going to go somewhere. And so I just started to notice it like on the inside, right? To get that anxious, kind of feel it in your gut, kind of, you know, get a little bit of a headache. And so I think where it really culminated was back in January as I'm walking through this process where I need to take this next leap. And just I noticed the physical reaction that I had towards it. It was just a sign that, hey, something internally is, you know, it is just not in alignment.
That's so interesting. I was out in LA coaching, and one of my clients there, Jeff Benton, who's a high performance specialist. I don't know if you know him. He had an interesting comment. He said that, he goes, people think that the brain remembers. He goes, the brain, it remembers like memories. He goes, but the body is like where 95% of where you store everything. Your body remembers. It's truly your body. So it's so interesting that you were talking about, you were physically starting to feel the effect of, you know, I'm sure in terms of how we grow up as entrepreneurs, it's often bull in a china shop. You know, we start and we fail, and then we just pick ourselves up, and I think it's probably the growth mindset, which I equate to being it's how we alchemize fear and uncertainty into clarity and confidence for others.
One of the speakers there, we'll just kind of share this real quick, is from the Polyvagal Institute. And one thing to talk about is, that Venga, the Vengus, or I'm probably mispronouncing, goes from the brainstem down to your gut. It's the one nerve that goes through your entire body. And really it's this idea that, you cannot think your way out of something you emoted yourself into. Right. So I've got this emotion and I can't think my way out of it. And a lot of times, like just getting clear, like with your body, and just getting some really good grounding exercises. And that's kind of made all the difference for me. Is not trying to outthink something I've emoted into.
When you're kind of going through the audit of your struggles, the things that this death by a thousand cuts.
Right. That's a great way to put it, Ben. That's how it felt. Yeah.
I'm just pulling from the great Taylor Swift song. Where she says "death by a thousand cuts." It's
Right. A lot of wisdom there. A lot of wisdom.
a lot of wisdom there. I'm curious, was there anything that surprised you most, like that really surprised you most, that percolated to the surface, that surprised you as a grief, or something that was that you still were grieving, that maybe you thought you'd grieved over?
Yeah. I think what surprised me the most was just how harsh my inner critic was. And I really realized that I don't talk to myself for a while, Ben. I don't know about you, but I can be the toughest guy on Dennis, and I think that really hit me. Just I really realized, like, over the last, like, couple months, just how I talk to Dennis. And I think and Ben, it's funny because I actually say this in a workshop, but I really have to take my own advice. Funny how that works. Um, is that, I thought, okay, if somebody like if somebody were to talk to my wife the way that Dennis talks to Dennis, what would Dennis do? Right. And honestly, Ben, like I kill him. Right. It's like, but yet we talk to ourselves and go, oh, Dennis, why are you such an idiot? Oh, why do you always do those stupid things? And right. But if anybody went to my wife and said, Lisa, why are you so stupid? Right, I'd be like, let's go. We're gonna fight.
Yeah.
And so I have really worked on, I think, over the last month or so, and this is fresh. This is hot off the press right here, what we're talking about, right? It's is really just working on my own internal dialogue, because I didn't realize how harsh I really was to myself.
Was there a part of yourself that you are harsher on than others? That I mean, and did that surprise you?
Yeah, I think performance wise, I think I was a lot harsher on myself. Because what's funny, Ben, is, I mean, a lot of people would maybe look at the different things we've done and say, like, Dennis, why you've made it? It's like you're already like, why? What? Right? It's like, what is this? Like, just enjoy your life, right? Enjoy your life. Just be happy. And gosh, I got to tell you, learning to be happy is, like, I think it might be a lifelong journey.
Yeah, I'm curious. Do you think it's happy, or do you think it's being in a place of joy? I'm curious. How do you define happy versus joy?
Yeah, it's probably really being in a place of joy, right? Because happiness is circumstantial. Joy is something that, it's who you are, that wells up from the inside. Almost like happiness has these exterior type things, but, being joyful on the inside.
Dennis, I'm curious. It almost seems that as children, I'm thinking about. I'm just gonna give a context here. I'm thinking about when we go back as kids, like before we had internal voice, right? Everything was fascinating. Everything was like motivating. And then there's a certain point that we hit as children that we want to grow up, right? And then we actually grow up and we realize we actually want to go Benjamin Button back to, like this underlying innocence and joy. I mean, is that is I love that you're saying this, because I think that so many people have an internal voice that no one wants to talk about. It's the dialogue in the shadows.
Yeah, well, and I think, Ben, I mean, it serves a purpose, right? That inner critic serves a purpose because it tells you right and wrong. It tells you when, right? It's like, you have to have it, but it's that harsh inner critic, right? It's that harshness, it's that dogmatic, it's those kind of things. And really, I don't think you ever get rid of it, but I think you learn to tame it, and I think you learn to use it as an advantage, not a disadvantage. And I think that's really where I'm at. I think for years I've used it as a disadvantage, right? It's sort of been an enemy, and now really making friends with it and using it for my advantage. And it really is an advantage, right? Because you think if you don't have it, it's like, so we have sociopaths, right? We have people just, right? They don't really probably have a inner critic, right? It's like, well, of course I killed that person.
Yeah, yeah, of course they killed that person. Do you have an example of where you felt like it was a disadvantage that now you're realizing, "Wait, this is how I alchemize this." Can you give an example?
I think what I realized, Ben, is that I'm okay being messy and that it's supposed to be messy and that humans are messy. And it's okay for me to have bad days, and it's okay for me to feel crappy. And and what's amazing, Ben, is that when I name it, I can tame it, right? And when I say it, I don't display it. And here's maybe an example. It's like I would used to like just like my tone would be harsh, maybe with a team member or with a client or with my wife, right? It's have this harsh tone, but realizing that, if I can just actually say, it's like, "Hey, I'm really sad right now." It's like, I'm really sad, and or, "Hey, I'm really pissed off right now." And just like that, I don't have to have a tone to it, but learning to name it so that I can tame it. And then really realizing that, you know, that there's a wisdom in your emotions, right? And they're just telling you what you need, right? Your your emotions are really just a reflection of things that you need. Is one of the great questions we can always ask people is like, as we're sharing these things, it's like, well, what do you need right now, Dennis? Well, what do you, I mean, sometimes you need perspective. Sometimes you need encouragement. I mean, I told my wife, I'd just be real vulnerable here. As I just, I was just sharing this loss with her 2 days ago. And she says, well, what do you need? And I said, I just need comfort. I just need you just to rub my neck, hold my hand, put your arms around me, give me 5 minutes of comfort.
Wow.
And I think as leaders, and I think here's the problem, is we're always giving, we're always giving, we're always giving, but we don't step back and know how to fill ourselves up.
Yes.
And we all have like these relational needs, like these relational nutrients, and really filling yourself up before that you go give. And I think for years, I've given and given and given and never ever stepped back and said, hey, just really filling up for me. And so in really realizing that these emotions are just indicators. They're right. There's no judgment. I usually should judge, every emotion, right? Especially the ones that weren't pleasant, right? It's like, well, I don't want to feel that, but realizing it's like, okay, that's just an indicator. It's an indicator of something that I need. It's an indicator of how I'm thinking. So what do I need? How do I need to think about it? And almost using them as, I guess, guideposts, right? Or sort of like, hey, there's something going on the inside.
That is fascinating. I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about emotions as these guideposts, but specifically when you talk about them as um, like nutritional deficiencies,
Yeah.
it makes so much sense. And I think that, well, I'm curious, two factors. Number one, what have you found for you that you need for you to have that kind of refilling? And I'm sure this is still, as you said, this is like breaking news. This is like raw. And then the follow on to that, how have you seen your willingness to name it so that you don't have to shame it?
These are just some obvious ones, right? Is that I know, like, work, something physical is always across the board, even if it is simply just a walk.
Yes.
But even sharing some of these things, Ben, my wife and I do this thing we call it a walk and talk. And we got this from Tony and Elisa De Lorenzo, so we'll kind of give a shout out to those guys. But it's this idea is that as you're processing emotions, bending, it's really hard to do it like sitting across the table, like face to face, looking at somebody, right? But if I am moving like on a walk and I'm just looking straight ahead, I'm not looking at my wife, it's easier to process. And so really working on different like physical activities, and and then a little bit just like being aware of my body, right? Because your emotions show up different, right? It's like anxiousness kind of shows up here in the head, where this fear kind of shows up in your gut, and tension shows up here in your shoulders. And really being just very aware of like, okay, what's going on in my body? Okay, how do I feel about that? And what's interesting is that and I don't know if you've seen this, is that, when you're working with a man or the male brain, now this is not, we're going to say something and it's not 100% true, right? Because everybody's got an outlier like, well, that's not, but in general, okay, let's say 70% of the time or something, is that if I'm talking to the male brain, I always ask them, hey, well, what do you think about this? Right? Because Ben, if you say, well, Dennis, I got an answer. But if you say, hey, Dennis, how do you feel about that? I'm like, I, but if I'm talking to a female brain, I always want to know, hey, how do you feel about that? Because typically females use their emotions to inform their thinking. Typically, the male brain uses their thinking to inform their emotions. And so getting really, really good. And so Ben, like one practice that I've gone back to is and you see these all over the internet, is just a good old feelings wheel.
Say more about that. Say more about how does it look?
There's sort of like six core emotions, right? People typically feel like mad, glad, or sad, right? Those are sort of like the three, right? Right. But getting really, really nuanced with your language, right? And so am I anxious? Am I concerned? Or am I afraid? Right? In many times, like when you can name the right emotion. See, because a lot of times, like we use harsh language with ourselves. I'm just pissed off. Well, are you pissed off or are you just a little irritated? Yeah, well, I experience it completely different. What I say determines my experience. How I name it determines my experience. Well, I wasn't really pissed off, right? I was just kind of a little annoyed, kind of annoyed me. Right. And it's this idea that we don't regulate ourselves. We don't have like this wide window of tolerance because we don't know how to process these little tiny emotions. And so, but here's a great maybe tip if maybe you're a little bit disconnected because here's what I think is that I think everybody has all of these emotions. The problem is a lot of us don't have access to them, right? It's like we don't even know what we're feeling. So literally, like I've gone back to every hour, I just have on my phone just an alarm that pops up and it says, "How are you feeling?" And I go, "How am I feeling?" Well, I'm feeling a little anxious. Not quite sure like how this podcast is going to go, right? It's happened like an hour before. Like it popped up. I'm like, well, how am I feeling? I got this podcast. I'm not sure what Ben's going to ask me. He might ask me a question that I don't even, I'm kind of like nervous a little bit. And, right. But here's the thing is like once I say it and get it out, because the problem is we don't say it and get it out. It like lives in here and then it becomes this gigantic monster.
Is the reason why people don't have access to it twofold? Is it a muscle that is not taught and that we don't practice and exercise that so that we feel confident in that? And then follow on, is saying it aloud perceived as a weakness from your perspectives? Like what you've witnessed and maybe even what you've experienced yourself growing up?
Well, for sure it has. I think right here's another reason is that typically when we have not bonded and we don't, boy, I'm going to open a can of worms with this for a minute. Okay, right. So if we haven't bonded like in our early ages, right? Say like, trauma or different things like, in our early ages, and we have not bonded with a safe adult figure, then typically that's where we lose some of this access. So we have to look for like safety in relationships and have some safe relationships to start to bond and really learn that skill. Because the way that I look at it, it's a skill. You have it. And so looking for safe places and having some safe places. And so, I mean, and that's one thing that I've really worked on over the last couple of months is really having some safe places where I have relationships in my life and, people that I don't pay, people that are not clients, right? People that don't think like I hung the moon, right? Because there's some people like, you're on stage and they think like you just must walk on water and, turn water into wine and just, right, and all this crazy stuff. And really just having relationships where I can just go, "Hey, I really feel like crap today. Can I just talk to you for a minute? Because I'm really nervous and anxious." And so being able to get it out and then examine it. I think that's the key thing. When it lives on the inside of you, it's not really examined. And that's what you want to do with it. It's like you want to get it out so that you can examine it. Even for example, I got this text message and I shared it with my wife and we were just talking about it. And it says, I just want to give him a really snarky response. I want to be a little passive aggressive. I'm a little PO'd about, right? Because it was something, this guy wanted me to do something. And then 2 months ago, I had sent this text message asking for a couple things and he just totally went dark. Right. And so like in my brain, like I'm thinking like you just disrespected me and now you want me to do this stuff. And, as I'm just talking it through, it's like I'm really kind of irritated and mad. And I said, I just really need perspective because I might not have the right perspective. And Ben, getting it out there, I was able to see like I really felt like he was disrespecting me. But you know what, Ben? He probably just forgot he even sent the text message. Like, guess what? There's been plenty of text messages that Dennis has missed and not seen. There's been plenty of text messages over the years that Dennis has ignored just because I got busy and right. And so I put this whole story, this whole emotional story behind it. But then I was able to sort of examine it and go, well, I see it as disrespect, but it probably is not. I don't know. Right. And I was able to create a great response that was very graceful and elegant to him and respected him. But maybe like 10 years ago, I'd have just like snapped off something snarky going, whatever.
Transformation into agency of your narrative.
Yeah, really. It's really because like, think about it. Everybody has a story they're telling themselves, right? You see or hear something and you tell yourself a story. And at the end of the day, it's like, you're in charge of your story, right? I mean, it goes back to innocence. It's like, is it an advantage or a disadvantage? And I think once you can process your past and process your grief, then it can turn into an advantage, right? I mean, a big grief that happened, trauma in my life is that when I was 15 years old, my dad went to prison, right? So it was one of the worst things that ever happened. The cops showed up, put him in handcuffs, took him to prison, and he's pretty much in and out of prison the rest of his life till he passed away. But when I was able to process it and examine it, it no longer became an advantage or it became a disadvantage. It became an advantage. It actually is my advantage, right? Having that trauma and that experience. But if you don't process it, right, and take the learning from it, then it's not an advantage. And so I have all of this learning that I was able to have from that trauma, but it wasn't until like I really could process the grief. And what I've realized is that, over the last couple, maybe say months since I was at this workshop, is that I'm processing grief really, really quickly. My learning is really going quick, even though it's painful and it's a little challenging. Honestly, my learning is gone through the roof and my confidence is starting to increase. But it was really processing this grief. Because when you go through it, you don't examine it. It's like you don't learn from it. And I think the value of every experience is what you learn from the experience.
Can you share, if you're willing, what did you feel? Obviously, 15 years old, senior. I mean, for most kids, your parents are your heroes until you realize that it's sort of like the person on stage, and then they realize that actually you're human, just like the rest of us. What obviously I can imagine, as I'm sure our audience can understand, in terms of what that must have felt like. Felt like a scarlet letter, maybe, uh, maybe a little bit of disappointment, shame, but can you talk about what did you feel then that felt like a disadvantage, and how? I mean, that's a big little anthill to climb.
Yeah, at its core, Ben, I felt abandoned, right? I felt abandoned. I felt all alone. I felt scared, right? I was this little kid, and I'm the oldest of three, and so I have two younger sisters. So that was like my male role model. That was, and so, but what I realized in that until I was able to process it, see, when somebody has a wound, here's what's fascinating about a wound. When somebody has a wound, everything becomes about that wound. Right. And so anytime anybody did something to me, I just felt abandoned. I felt like I was all alone. And really being able to speak that. And even today, I'm 55 years old. So what that was like, gosh, that was 40 years ago. And I think it's something that I'm still, there's even times today, I think like last week where, I just told my wife, it's like, I just feel kind of all alone. I know it's not true, but this is how I feel. Right. And not stuffing it. Cause I think that's the problem is because it's going to show up. Maybe you can stuff it all day long, but this thing is coming back around. And so realizing, that when there's a wound, everything becomes about that wound. Ben, maybe we see this a lot with clients, right? Is, disrespect is a big thing, in healthcare right now, right? With nurses and stuff. And, a supervisor will walk by and say something goes, well, she was just disrespectful. She didn't say anything. She didn't talk to me. She's disrespected me. Right. And so then the leader goes, okay, I got to say hi every single time I see. And so the next day she's walking down the hallway. She says hi. And the lady goes, well, that was just, what does she mean by that? Why is she saying hi? Well, that was just it. Right. And it's like, can't win for trying. Right. I do this, you feel disrespected. I do this, you feel disrespected. And really realizing that like, if that's a wound that you have, every single action like revolves around that wound. And until you can get that thing healed, it'll always come back up. And think about even like, okay, so as entrepreneurs, right? I think sometimes we are the most damaged people with high functioning coping skills. Come on, right? Right. Right. And so sometimes like I've realized even in my entrepreneurial journey is how much of it was about the chase for healing. I was trying to fill something on the inside of Dennis, right? It's like, we got to get the new car and got to get the new house and, win this deal and right. And it was really, and this has only been, this has only been in the last like three or 4 years for me is that really it's no longer about healing an inner wound. It's become just for the joy of growth. But I think like Ben, if you can't tell the truth about yourself like that, and I just think like, how many people in the audience, like, really, is it really about growth or are you just trying to keep up with this person? Right. Or are you just trying to like, have the country club membership or have these outward toys or these outward signs. Right. And only you know the answer to that. But I think a lot of times, I think that's sometimes the challenge is that we're trying to fill a void that, gosh, that success can't fill.
Yeah, I mean, all these Band-Aids.
We're going deep, Ben, man. We're like,
We're going there. Well, it is interesting because I've always wondered, where does some of this ambition come from that you see in entrepreneurs? The willingness to step into the headwind, the willingness to step into the unknown, to go out on the catwalk without a safety net below. Where does that come from? And uh, I'm, that's really interesting. That obviously, I think there's some genetic and just there's some things that like we have a ability to see the world differently. But I'm curious if some of the fuel are things that we don't even know subconsciously.
yeah, and I think like once I was able to really like work on healing that, it's become more enjoyable. Right. There's not like this internal almost like drive that's the best way I could say is like almost like an internal demon that's kind of like driving you, driving you, driving you, driving you. And so I've really been very aware of like, when I'm angry or irritated, it's like, well, what's really driving me? Right. What's really driving this? My wife told me that a while back ago that she said, she says, I love vacation Dennis, but I don't always like work Dennis. And she's a co-founder in the business. And so, gosh, we're together all the time. And she's a major part of the business. But, when she told me that, I said, okay, there's something wrong. Cause like I can be on free days and, just enjoyable fun. But there's something that happened when I showed up at work and like the work hat was on. And so I had to really step back and go, okay, well, what's really driving me? What's really kind of causing this anxiousness and this fear and so really I think it's been a journey just getting healed and walking through those things and
That's amazing. If your wife was here, what would she say is the biggest difference that she's seen from this in you? And more importantly, just in the last 3-4 weeks since you've come back and realized I got a I got a trunk full of grief that needs to be like sorted through.
yeah, I mean, and my wife is great because she really does containment really well. She's able to just help people process through. So maybe that's a real advantage. I have having her on my team, but I think she'd probably say that, the joy is kind of coming back. There's more joy in the journey now where it's not so driven. And I think I'm letting things come to me, not having going after things. Sort of like just showing up and being really aware of what's around me and then just having things come to me instead of me always going after them. right? I mean, isn't it Dan who says that, you always want to be pulled, never pushing,
Yes.
right? And so I almost feel like I'm really being pulled, and it's not so much about the push and the press, but it's about the pull. And I think a big part of that is just really being aware, and I think a lot of times, like, I don't know about you, Ben, but I just sort of like trade busyness, right? That feeling of like, right, for like really being, effective and productive, but it's like busy and productive are two different things. I'm a classy busy guy. Like I love a full calendar and run with my head cut off, but just being okay with a lot of like white space. And I think as I continue down this journey, I'm really starting to like Dennis, Ben. It's I really kind of like hanging out with him. You know Yeah, and I would say, for years, I didn't like him very much. And gosh, it's kinda like raw and, like, sad to say here, but it really is the truth, and so I think that's really what's creating a lot of this is because I like me. I'm a pretty good guy. I'm okay, and it's okay to be messy. It's okay to make mistakes. I don't have to be perfect, and, so, yeah, I tell people when I left this workshop, I was telling some people that were there, is like, "Hey, I'm gonna leave perfect dentist here in California, right? At Costa Mesa, room 210. I'm gonna leave perfect dentist and I'm coming back to the East Coast. I'm just gonna bring messy dentist with me. I'm just I'm messy." And then it's really freeing. It's really fun to be messy. And it's okay.
That is so beautiful. That is so, so freeing. You must feel when you have those moments where you realize it's like you are having that internal dialogue of love with yourself, that you have to feel like Christmas morning again.
That is a great way to say it. Yeah. Yeah. And there's this proverb that says his mercies are new every morning, right? And there's new mercy every morning. And I'm always fascinated. Brene Brown kind of has this thing that I remember that she said is that, when people share their vulnerabilities and are transparent about their weaknesses, we think, oh my gosh, they are so strong. They are so powerful. But as I'm sharing them, guess how I feel, Ben? I feel very weak. So weak, inadequate. I don't measure up. And just getting good with just being messy and just sharing some of those things. And I think you connect to people through our weaknesses, not our strengths. I think you convince people through your strengths, but I think you connect with them through your weakness. And so I've seen my connections kind of go up too. It's been fun.
What have you found, or maybe in yourself, or even as you have observed in others as they're unpacking these griefs, these things that are these narratives that aren't serving them very well, or at least the version of the narrative that they have. What are the ones that are the most of that wheel, that emotion wheel, are the hardest to either access and or to metabolize?
I think the hardest are anger, and I think the hardest are sadness. I think because it deals with some kind of loss. Typically, like, you're angry about a loss or you're sad about a loss. And so, but in fact, we created a tool for our roundtable group, and maybe we can give this to the audience. We wasn't planning on doing this. It's called the Disappointment Navigator. It's how do you navigate through disappointment? It's a 4-step process that people can just work on it on your own. And it's how I've processed grief over the last like 3 or 4 weeks. Is like, this is the event. Here's how I feel or think about it. This is what I need. Who can I share it with? And I've started to get just different insights, as I'm kind of processing like a lot of the grief. So we'll put it in the show notes, and we'll put a link for people to get the Disappointment Navigator. But that's been a great tool that I really created for me because I needed to, figure out how to process this stuff. And what's fascinating, we just launched it on Friday with a group of roundtable participants, and everybody, like, they got a lot of energy from it. So I know I'm on the right track.
Yeah, what are you typically seeing as people process this, right? I mean, this is a great framework. I'm super excited about, and thank you. Thanks for the generosity. What are you finding that when people process these types of things through like this tool?
Yeah, you see a lot of energy and a lot of learning. because what it does is because every experience, here's what I think an experience is. It's an event plus an emotional attachment to that event. It's like that event and the emotion creates the experience. And so when you're able to separate the event from the emotion, then you can examine the emotion and it changes the experience. Right. Which goes back to a lot of people, like they judge other people's trauma. They say, well, something worse happened to me. That's not traumatic. Well, your trauma is your trauma, right? Because you had an emotion attached to that event. And here's where really even where a bigger problem happens is that when you don't process the emotion, you get stuck. Right. It's almost like why a 10-year-old can act or like a 40-year-old can act like a 10-year-old. Like, wow, what just happened? Right. And whenever people over respond, it is never ever about the event that you over responded to, but it is about an event. Right. And realize like, hey, let's go back to that event. So it's the event plus your emotion determines your experience. And so what I've seen is that people have a different experience about their past. They go, oh, well, I'm no longer, I processed the grief and now, I learned this and this and this. Wow, God, I'm really glad I went through that. That's awesome. Hey, it was hard at the time, but wow, I'm super glad, right? Like, but I can sit here and say, I am really, really glad that I went through that experience of my dad being in prison because but I learned how to be a dad. 'Cause I learned what not to do, right? I learned, okay, no, I've got adult children, right? All my children are adults and and I've learned how to be a great dad because I know, okay, this is what I'm not going to do. Right? I'm not going to be closed and, just head down working. I'm going to be invested in relationships. I'm going to spend time and right. And if I didn't have that experience, I might not be the kind of dad I am. But if you don't process through that emotion of the event, right? It's like you don't get any learning from it.
What a beautiful unlock for me that when someone over responds or you over respond, it's basically echoes from a wound.
Yeah. And so in realizing when you do over respond, right? Because there's still times I over respond. Realize when I do over respond, I want to go back and go, okay, where did that come from? What was going on in Dennis at the time? How was I thinking about it? How was I feeling about it? Right? Because an event is just an event, right? It is, right? It's not good or bad, but it's like the emotion you attach to it. And I think what I love about the disappointment navigator is it kind of separates the event from the emotion. And then you can really like navigate through it.
That's profound, Dennis. I love so much everything you just said there.
I think the more that we can talk about these things really, and I think the more that, and I just want to encourage all the entrepreneurs to have these safe places where you can share these kind of things. It's almost like we created this mastermind roundtable experience just for like 8 people because like, Ben, you can't talk about these things, right? It's like, where can you go to talk about these things? And so I think a lot of people say it's lonely at the top. And I think it's only lonely if you created it that way, right? If you've created it that way. And so, having these relationships in your life that are safe.
I mean, what's that proverb that you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's more fun, right? It's more fun. It's more fun to go together.
How do you define safe space? So let's just assume I really like when people talk to me if it's something I don't know, like I'm a 5-year-old. Can you define safe spaces, like what that looks like, what that feels like, what that sounds like? So for those who might be going and kind of taking a internal audit of where are those safe spaces, who are those safe spaces, and how can they find them? Can you articulate that?
Yeah. So what's interesting about safety is that only you determine what a safe place is for you, first of all. Right. So I don't know if there's necessarily a formula, but I think there are some indicators to look for. Right. And so I think an indicator is that when you allow people to have their emotions and you do this, there's this idea of called containment, right? Which means like, Ben, I'm going to allow you to just share whatever you want, however you feel, even if you're angry at me, and I'm not going to take it personal, right? Because here's the thing, Ben, when you are talking about your emotions, when you're giving me feedback, you are not telling me about Dennis, you are telling me about you. You cannot attack me unless I believe you're attacking me, right? If I don't believe it's an attack, it's not. Now watch this. And if I don't believe it's an attack, I don't have to defend. So here's a great example. I'm driving in the car a couple months ago, and it was on a Saturday morning, and my wife is a little irritated, upset, and she's telling me about this experience that she had yesterday with me, right? And Ben, it was a boneheaded thing, right? I did say something boneheaded, right? It's like I probably shouldn't have said it. And I started to get a little irritated and a little annoyed, right? I'm like, okay, we're gonna fight. We're gonna fight. Like I'm getting a little agitated, right? It's like you're mischaracterizing me, you're judging what I did. But here's the thought I had. I thought, okay, what would be different if Dennis wasn't here in the car next to his wife? And I thought, would she still be mad? I go, yeah, she'd still be mad. She'd still be pissed off. So I realized it's not about me, it's about her. And so having people that you can just be you and you can be messy with, and people that don't judge you, people that don't see it as an attack, people that don't get defensive. And so I think like really looking out, and sometimes you have to pre-frame these things, so a lot of times, like, just having that kind of conversation. Hey, listen, I need to share something with you, and I don't want you to feel like it's an attack. I don't want you to defend. I just need to say it. And I really just need containment and just to get it out and get some perspective.
That's beautiful.
Right. And so I think it's going out and just by trial and error a little bit. Right. Because it takes a lot of emotional maturity to have people like this in your life.
Yeah. Takes a lot of emotional maturity, especially, I mean, in all my businesses, my wife Jenna is also my business partner, and I am just replaying in my head all of like the memories and experiences that had we just had the language to say, hey, I need a containment space, like how much faster we would have moved on things in both personally and professionally.
Yeah, because then it doesn't become personal. And I think, Ben, I don't know if you've seen this. We're going to get real vulnerable now. But I wanted to create this relationship where my wife and I could still, like, argue about or disagree about something at 4 o'clock and still have sex that night.
Yes.
Right. Right. It's like, hey, right. How do we have, like, these dialogues, that are safe, but we disagree. And then at 5 o'clock, it's like, hey, I would just want you to be my girlfriend. Hey, let's go, let's go get a glass of wine, and I just want you to be my girlfriend. And so I think there's a real art to it. So all of our entrepreneurs that are working with their spouses, I love it. I love you do it. Just, both of you get healthy at the same time. That's my encouragement.
Well, I just think I saw the burst per women go up here, not just in entrepreneurs, but across all people. I mean, what you just said, I think just helped me alchemize so much already just in like my existing relationship of giving me language and also incredible agency to be able to go create that for her. I mean, because I'm a big fan. It's really tough to ask someone to give something to you that you haven't already given first. And what a gift. I mean, I'm going back through, and I think, it's so interesting. We have our own wounds, right, in ourselves. But I'm also really curious about the wounds that we create.
Well, you think about this, it's like, the first thing that I want, Brene Brown has this sort of like word picture, right? It's like, it's like somebody falls into a well. Right. And I'm real great at throwing the rope, going, Ben, climb up. Come on. Here's how you do it. Step 1, 2, 3. Come on, Bert. But learning first, I first have to get in your well. Right. And so what I've learned is that when people first come to me, is that I'm very careful with my advice, right? Because unsolicited advice comes across as criticism. And I think, being the parent of an adult, I have 4 adult children, and they'll probably listen to this and probably crack up. But, that's one thing that I'm learning as a dad, right? My kids share these things with me, and it's like, that's dumb, that's stupid. Here, let me tell you how to, right? What the heck, right? It's like, and I know it because like I've done that stupid thing 5 other times. But just with anybody is that you never give advice unless it's solicited. And first, just get in people's well, because people want to feel understood. And I think that's the key to creating a safe place. So another little tip or trick is to, like, hey, what I heard you say was blank, blank, blank. Is that correct? Right? Hey, what I heard you, instead of, you said blah, 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 blah. right? Which comes across as an attack, but it's like, hey, what I heard you say was this and this. Is that correct? And Ben, you don't know how many times people go, no, that's not what I meant. And then they have to and they go, right. And really getting to that place of like, hey, did I hear you correctly? This is because people want to be heard before they want any kind of advice. And so I think that's the key to really creating safe places for others is really helping people hear heard.
Yeah, I'm convinced that the elixir of everything, at the core of everything, is people want to be seen, heard, and understood.
Yeah. 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 And then advice, right? And then suggestions and right. Really coming down to those three things. And I think it'll really help the entrepreneurs because I mean, business is just people doing transactions. Business is all relational
Yes.
and and people are emotional. And so people are messy. So business is messy and it's supposed to be messy and it's okay.
Isn't it interesting as entrepreneurs, Dennis? I'm curious from your perspective. We are really willing to get in other people's wells, business wise, but we don't often show and share the same sort of enthusiasm personally. At least that, like, what I'm thinking just now is that as I'm listening to you, is I'm so willing to hop in other people's wells and offer containment. I'm not nearly as willing to do that personally.
I think it's a real need, right? Because all professional constraints come out of personal constraints. I can take all professional constraints and there's something because the problems you have in your business are the same problems you're probably having at home. Oh, you're not having that hard conversation with a partner. Well, you don't have a hard conversation with your kids or your wife, or you don't step into conflict, right? And so it's like, and Ben, here's my biggest problem. I don't know if you have the same problem, but my biggest problem is everywhere I go, there I am. You know what I mean? Well, here, right? It's like I got the same problem at home. And so I think sometimes, especially even as entrepreneurs, like maybe we're easier to get into containment with people because like we're going to a solution. And sometimes like I don't have all the solutions personally for you. I just don't, right? And then I feel very uncomfortable because I'm supposed to know stuff. And a lot of times it's okay to know, and people just want you to sit there with them. And I think this is the fun stuff, right? This is the stuff that, at the end of the day, we can be 80, 90, 100 and 150 years old, whatever, and have all the toys. But man, if I don't have rich relationships, right? I mean, Chad Johnson, a friend of ours, right? He live relationship rich. He's the epitome of that. And so just being really rich, in your relationships, but I get it. And I've come to the point where it's okay not to know. Hey, Ben, I might not have all your answers and I'm okay with that. I don't have to have all your answers. I don't have to feel like I have to have your answers. It's not my job.
So often we feel that the solution is being the hero, but I'm almost just recategorizing that to being a hero is helping others be seen, heard, and understood.
Yeah, that's a really great way to look at it.
I was having a conversation with Julia Waller, who incredible unique ability specialist at Strategic Coach, and she made a comment that she said Dan is putting out into the world what he's looking for himself. Your comment of do you have the same problem everywhere I go, here I am. And have you found that in your own sort of entrepreneurial journey that the things that you have been creating for others is a thing that you have been looking for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I created the roundtable mastermind experience because this is what I would have wanted, right? Hey, this is what I want. So other people probably want it too, but I want this. So let me go out and create this. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to even things like mindset scorecard, which we're both familiar with, right? It's like you're really looking for you, right? It's like going out in the world, right? I'm kind of looking for people that, right? I'm looking for me, and it really is true.
What would you tell entrepreneurs who go, you know what, that's great, I still have all the successes, and let's even just say high performing leaders, right? Because at the end of the day, they're leading big organizations. What would you tell them is the compelling outcome that if they go down this journey, in this audit, in this excavation, what's on the other side of it for them?
That's such a great question. On the other side is more joy than you've ever experienced. I think as I've gone through this, my joy in my joy and my energy have really, like, really increased. If you have a harsh inner critic and you do not know what it's like to live with a harsh inner critic, it's like it's almost hard for somebody to explain to you what it is, right? It's almost hard to go, oh, there's another way to life. And so I think there's more life to life. There's more living. It's really kind of an abundant life, abundant on the inside. And because I will just tell you that I've lived with a demon chasing me for years, and it's not chasing me anymore. And so things have become easier. They become fun. Okay, so in this, I created this success criteria for relationships and opportunities. And I think this is what happens. Is I tell people all the time is like you have to pay a fee to be able to be in my life. FEE. Got to pay this fee. It can be fun, right? If it's not fun, if it's not energetic, right? It's got to produce some kind of energy. Can't be a drain, right? It's got to be fun. It's got to be energetic, and there's just got to be an ease to it, right? It's just that ease. And so what I think is on the other side is more fun. It becomes easier, and you get more energy. Like the fees start to increase.
That's incredible.
So I think that's what happens as you go through it.
When you go back to your 25-year-old self and look at the fees that you were charging, how have they changed?
Oh gosh, I was totally the seller, not the buyer in every relationship, right? Right. It's like, hey man, I'm just trying to make a buck here. You know what I'm saying? Right? Back then. And so I would morph myself, and I would try to take every single opportunity that came my way. And so I was busy, frantic, frustrated, irritable. And now I've just kind of given up busy. I've just left busy. I've left busy Dennis, right? I'm no longer busy Dennis. I'm just peaceful, productive. I'm the peaceful, productive Dennis. I'm not busy Dennis. And so, and I kind of like peaceful, productive Dennis a lot better than busy Dennis.
That's so powerful. That fee. Thank you. I mean, you've dropped some like gems. Talk about outcomes you look for now. Like, there's the before Dennis as the seller. Now there's Dennis as the buyer. I look at Dennis before the seller. You were surviving. You're just trying to be alive. And it seems like now you're living. And talk about the outcomes you're looking for.
I think the outcomes we're really is really long term sustainable, success in every area, whether it's like health, finances, relationships, spiritually. Is like and I really have this long term 25, 50-year sort of framework and picture in my mind, and I'm not looking for the outcome today. And so I'm really building every day builds upon each other. And so as long as there is progress on the most important things, and that's all I care about. And I don't have to do it today, Ben. There's nothing more freeing than to feel like, oh gosh, I got to do it in 90 days. I got to do it in a year. Now I got so much time.
That's incredible. Can you share what that 25, 50-year version is? I mean, that wisdom. I mean, the financial, the health, the spiritual piece. I would love to know how this is alchemized for you.
I think when I look out, I still want to be running marathons and still competing. I want to do a competition every year, some kind of competition where, I'm continuing to get stronger. And when I look at finances, it's really become now about what we give, right? We how we do our finances is a little different today, because first thing we do is we really strategize on what we want to give that year, and really pray about it and really ask God. It's like, hey, what's our giving goal? And then from the giving goal, let everything flow out of there, which means I'm looking at what I give, not what I get. And so looking at it that way, and Ben, I'm a grandfather now. And so looking ahead, being like a great grandfather, and what's the legacy that I leave, for my grandchildren and great grandchildren. Just some of those things, in a little bit like letting I think sometimes like it's the tail wags the dog if you're not careful.
Yes.
Right. And so I really want to go like, this is the dog, and just sort of let the tail sort of like do what it's going to do. But getting really, really clear on, these outcomes. I don't know. Does that answer it?
Yeah, it does. It does. Especially, I'm really curious. Did you have a moment where you went, there's a correlation to when I focus on giving that actually has a boomerang effect that I'm actually getting?
I think you make a living by what you get, but you make a lifestyle, you make a life by what you give. Right. And so this idea of like living to give, Ben, I have this idea in every relationship, I want to be the biggest giver. Right. And so I look out and this is just not a money thing, right? This is, I want to give I want to give open doors. I want to give opportunities. And what's fascinating is as that becomes your lifestyle, you attract other big givers, right? And then I'm like, "Ooh, boy, that person gives a whole lot of themselves. They give this and this. Ooh, how can I be an even bigger giver?" And so I think stepping into relationships and going, "Okay, what can I give? How can I serve?" And sort of having that mindset really it's a great compass in my mind.
That's incredible. This reminds me of one of my episodes. I was actually had interviewed Reagan Archibald,
Oh gosh, I love it. I love that guy.
and we got into this really deep conversation about energy and about how like you attract and you also respond to frequencies, and frequencies we don't even know we're putting out. And I was telling him that I had seen this Instagram post where it showed this Japanese scientist. Basically, there was a tuning fork, there was a ping pong ball next to it, and it was 440 hertz, and he was hitting like 550 hertz and nothing was happening. And then he was like 5 feet away, then he hit a 440 hertz, and all of a sudden the ping pong ball just came alive. And it's so interesting to me, your comment that giving is a frequency.
Yeah, it really is, right? And I don't know if you've seen this study. We'll have to find out where it is, but Harvard University, probably 25, 30 years ago, did the survey that said that your heartbeat vibrations go out 8 feet in front of you. And so it's this idea that people feel you before they hear you. And it's true, right, Ben? It's like, I mean, we've all met people that like, they're saying the right thing, they're dressed the right way, they look the right way, but just something, just something is, I don't know what it is, because people feel you. And so I think there is something really to just like being that person. And I think a lot of times we've really been working with clients a lot on this is that, they set goals. They set all these doing goals, but they never step back and go, what are my being goals? Right? Who do I want to become? Because the reality is that we've reached certain like levels of results because that's the kind of person I am. So if I want these results that are even more, who do I need to become in order to like, don't worry about the results, almost like, who do you need to become? What's the kind of person you need to become?
How would you articulate who you were to who you've become now?
Oh gosh, Ben, I was a scared, frightened little boy living in a man's body that I always had to like reach for more. I had to gobble up everything. I had to take, take, take. And people would know that, right? This is something internally. But the person that I am now is I'm really learning how to be an adult, truly, right? I'm learning how to be a peaceful, productive adult, make space for other people that has safe places and is a safe place for others. And I got to tell you, it's much more enjoyable to be an adult than a little boy.
Amen.
It, it's a lot more enjoyable. We went for it today. Gosh,
We did.
I don't think I've ever shared some of these things ever anywhere.
I am so happy you did, Dennis. Like, I mean, truly, I mean, what an absolute like gift. What an absolute gift. I'm curious, so when you think about this next 25 to 50-year version, obviously there's the Dennis today as you are becoming. Uh, what do you feel like is this next leap for you in the becoming? I mean, I love this framework rather than go, what's your next 10x leap? Often, well, I want to grow the company to XYZ. I want to do XYZ. But I really love this framework of what's the next 10x version of who you become in your mind. I mean, obviously this is a hypothesis, right? Which as entrepreneurs, that's what we do.
The next 10x leap really for Dennis or the next person that I become is that I move from being a performer to really producing an organization that has long-term effects. So I mean, it, just so people kind of understand is that I do a lot of keynote speaking, a lot of these type of things, training, and I really move from being like the performer to really producing an organization and producing other people that can take some of these same lessons that we've learned. And to do that, Ben, I've realized is that, I don't always get the applause. I have to allow other people to get the applause. I have to, become much more secure in just who I am.
I love that you're sharing that, Dennis. I think that is such a simple statement, but so hard hitting. And I think that my experience with that was Dan Sullivan had said, he'd asked the room, he said, "Hey, how many people in here think they're leaders?" Of course, everyone in the room. And he goes, "How many people in here are creating leaders?" And of course, truthfully, there was maybe a couple people who raised their hand, but instead of it being straight up, it was more kind of like shoulder level, which really told me that everyone in the room, and it really forced me to look at these identities that I have. And it was a real like headwind that I had to face. And I realized, and Dan, actually, I just saw him last week in Toronto. And again, I'm paraphrasing. He said, leadership, people think, is about being at the top of the pyramid. And he goes, leadership now in this network economy, this networks that we're creating, is about improving the capabilities of others. And I love what you're talking about for yourself, because it really doubles down on this giving.
Well, I think, a lot of times, like, we're teaching what we know, but we produce who we are. And so stepping back and going, okay, I'm producing, if I'm really this type of person, I should be producing this. But if I'm not, then I got to look first here. It's like, who do I have to become? Because Ben, like, and I'm sure you realize this is like, great people hang out with great people. And I even realized it's like building a team, right? I tell you, like, 15 years ago, how many people I went through, like, trying to hire an assistant, trying to hire this, right? And I just burned through a bunch of people. And I realized the problem wasn't them. The problem was Dennis. I just was not ready, right, to be the type of person that had that kind of team. And what I've realized is, like, we have an amazing team. And sometimes I step back and go, really, you're working here? Really? Cause like, you're really a smart, and you're really? Oh, wow. So, I just gotta get better at being Dennis. And I think for all entrepreneurs, just get better at being you, right? Don't try to be Ben. Don't try to be Dennis. Don't try to be Dan Sullivan, whoever your favorite idol is. Just be really good at being you.
It's so simple. It's profound. Why is that so hard, Dennis? Dennis, why is that so hard? Why did it take you, decades for you to just embrace you? Why? We're still embracing. I will say, in terms of on my walk, I am still embracing on a day-to-day basis, learning to give myself the hugs along the way. Why is that so incredibly hard?
I think it goes back to, comparison, is the thief of joy, right? So I look out, and I think admiration, a lot of times, like, I look at my deficiencies and go, oh, and then I have other people that are strong at that. And so I admire that. And I think it's really getting real clear on your identity, right? Really getting clear on your identity and who God has called you to be, not who somebody else is. And we can admire these things, but just really getting clear. And I think it's this comparison idea, right? Because maybe we haven't felt safe growing up, didn't bond well. And so didn't start off like at a great emotional place. And then with these emotional deficiencies, we compare. And so and it just creates this entire crazy cycle.
I love this idea of this comparison, Dennis, because comparison can also be a useful tool.
Yeah.
What they say, like, money is a horrible servant, but is a horrible master, but a wonderful servant, right? Comparison, I would say, is a horrible master, but maybe potentially in times to, like, who do you want to emulate? But what are the ones that you have looked back on that have created the greatest headwind for you?
Oh gosh, you want to name names, or it's like I'm thinking about like 15 different like relationships. No, I think a lot of it, is our different speakers that I saw, that maybe did it a little different. And I wanted like I found myself like speaking really, really fast because I saw this one speaker who's like so good and so entertaining, so motivating. So I thought, well, I just got to speak really, really fast. And I've realized that, looking out, and I think sometimes Ben is like, being envy. Let's just tell the truth, right? Being envious on what people had. Also, looking at like the type of organization they had or the toys that they had and being envious and kind of going, me too, me too, me too. And, and I think just getting really, really comfortable in my own skin.
You have dropped so many nuggets of knowledge, right? Which is, you've had your own real life MBA, as Tim Ferriss would say, your own real life MBA to get to some of these nuggets. But I'm really curious, who have you emulated, right? When we talk about comparison, right, that has been beneficial. Who have you emulated? Who has been really impactful, right? Because if we really are truthful, we stand on the shoulder of so many giants, right? I mean, your dad was a giant that you're standing now on that shoulder, right? Which maybe didn't feel that way, but what are the sources and pockets of wisdom, or which I actually look at wisdom like you look at Lee Brower, right? I'm not going to say the word wisdom, but I'm going to talk. Well, I'm going to say these knowledge that someone turned into wisdom.
I think of the different people that gave me opportunities and people that believed in me before I could believe in myself. And so I'm thinking at school, one particular person that led a singing and but I always wanted to be a professional trombone player. That's one of my secrets that a lot of people don't know. I had an educator that really gave me space and saw my potential. And I think about all the different people. We spent 10 years in Eastern Europe, came back to the States, and there's a particular guy that led us to Greenville that gave us an opportunity to come to Greenville and believed in us. Really, it's all the people that believed in Dennis before Dennis could believe in Dennis. As I kind of think through it right now, I think sometimes we got to borrow people's belief. And so that's a good sort of lesson to me is to allow people to borrow my belief because the people that were the most impactful, they saw my potential and created space for me to step into it.
Why is it so much easier to see someone else's potential than your own?
I think when you're emotionally connected to an issue, your vision is always fuzzy. You're out of focus a little bit. And so I think it a little bit is human nature because right. We're all emotionally connected to our outcomes, right? To my outcome. And I have to be because that's what drives me to like keep pushing and gives me all that energy. But sort of the flip side is that my focus is a little bit fuzzy. And so I think that's where having really trusted relationships that can give you the feedback, that can speak to it, sort of show it to you. Right. But Ben, one thing that really helped me is something you said at a workshop we were in is that, I was telling you about my fee structure and you're like, well, you're a 5 times that. And I'm like, holy crap. I'd like to be a 5 times that. Like, man, I'd love that, but I might need to borrow some of your belief there, Ben, because if you see it, maybe it is true, right? But I don't see it. And so I think that we have to have these relationships that can speak to it, kind of call it out, kind of speak to the king inside of us.
Oh, love that language. Speak to the king or queen inside of us. That is beautiful.
I mean, that's from the old biblical story about, David was like King David, right? He was like going crazy and he was going to kill Saul and do all the, things. And his wife came to him and said, hey, would the king of Israel really act this way? It was almost like he just woke up and go, yeah, this is not king behavior. And so really having people in our lives that kind of speak to the king inside of us and kind of call it out.
By the way, I think when people listen to this podcast or watch this on YouTube, they're going to see the same thing that I saw, that you are a transportation unit for them to be able to actually discover that inner child that's growing into that adult, that what they're becoming. And that is, you've dropped so many things of knowledge today, and you're just reinforcing what I said to you way back in, I think it was the December, or maybe it was even October when we saw each other. Dennis, if people want to find out more about you, how can they actually find you? I mean, do you have a book out there? Do you have You talked about this roundtable. Yeah. What are your socials?
Yeah. So you can find us at leadershipdevgroup.com. And then we're on all the socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, all that kind of stuff. And we're our ideal person that we work with. We work in a lot of different industries. So one thing I tell people all the time is like 8 Qualities of Drama-Free Teams or Drama-Free Teams in Healthcare are 2 different books that we have. And I tell people all the time, get the book, read the book. If you love the book, you're going to love us. But if you don't like the book, boy, you're really not going to like us at all. You know, so I encourage people really to get the book, and these are the same type of things. We say it a little different, Ben, but these are the same type of things that we talk about in our workshops. Say it a little bit different, so whether we're in a hospital group or a long-term care group or credit unions, banks, with roundtables, with groups of entrepreneurs, our stuff really becomes group therapy, and we really work on the person that you're becoming. So it's kind of my life message, I guess. So you can find us all there.
I love that. Well, Dennis, I want to give you the last word. It's one of the things I like to give my guests is, what's the last word you want the audience to hear or to kind of maybe ponder after this workshop? But before I do that, I want to say thank you so much for coming on to this podcast. I love having conversations with interesting people, and I got to tell you, you dropped so many nuggets that I'm gonna have to go back and re-watch this and re-listen to it. I found myself wishing I had a notepad to be able to write down. I mean, you had some one-liners, some structures, and some like thinking processes that I just think are just next level. And thank you for just the generosity of sharing your vulnerability. Thank you for the generosity of sharing your journey. I know it's going to speak to the audience because it really spoke to me. So thank you for hopping on today.
It's been an honor. I think the thing that I want to just encourage people is find a life team. Find these relationships that are safe places for you that you can process through some of these issues, and because they always show up, right? You can stuff them, but they will show up later on in life. And the faster you can process it, the faster you can learn, and the faster you can grow. And so being able to process these emotions, that you learn more, you grow more. And what I've learned is just to have a life team. Find 2 or 3, 4 relationships that you can just be vulnerable, transparent, because they've saved my life, Ben. They have saved my life. And you and I both know a lot of entrepreneurs that have crashed and burned, right? They had these really high successes, and then they just self-sabotage and just, mess it all up. And so I really want to build for long-term success, and I want the audience to build for long-term success. So find a life team, find people you can be honest and transparent with, and go grow.
I love that. Dennis, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. A big thanks to Elation Lab for the production and creative design. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Keep listening for more Max Life.